Aloha everyone, my name is Anderson Lay. I'm the Artistic Director for the Hawaii International Film Festival presented by Hale Kalani. Thank you for coming to this afternoon's amazing Beyond Resilience panel. And I just want to I'm going to do my spiel before the Firelight Media team come over and take over as hosts and whatnot. So as you know, I think this is day 4 of HIFF 44. It's been an amazing opening weekend of just having Firelight Media in attendance, and also the Reciprocity Project team, and also Pacific Islanders Communication. I started shouting out to Firelight Media, but also I wanted to shout out to Cheryl Hirasa and her team at PIC, and also Tracy Rector and her team. And then we just had amazing films from the Reciprocity Project, we showed earlier today to a sold-out audience, and we had a great homegrown screening yesterday to 2 houses sold out, which is great. And yeah, to see so much connective tissue and allyship and partnership with these organizations, and also just as you know, the whole point of HIFF is to be a forum, and although and to be a forum and focus on Native Hawaiian, Indigenous, and Pacific Islander filmmaking. So thank you very much for being here. Also, I just want to continue my spiel. With Firelight, we also are honoring, you saw Stanley Nelson, founder of Firelight Media. We are honoring him next weekend with our Vision and Film Award. Really excited to have Stanley Nelson here. Also, we're going to have the Hawaii premiere of his latest documentary called San Juan Hill, Manhattan's Lost Neighborhood. It's excellent, and we're going to have a conversation after-film conversation with Stanley and Dr. Akemi Glenn from Popolo Project. And also, just don't forget, we also have the annual Pacific Showcase presented by PIC, Pacific Islands Communication. We have a lot of programs still to be unspooled at Kahala theaters and around the state, but also with another honoree, the Leanne K. Ferrer Trailblazer Award presented by Pacific Islands Communications. We are honoring Maori actor Timur Morrison. So he will be here for a 30th anniversary screening of Once Were Warriors. So very exciting. So I'm done with my spiel now. I'm the carnival barker, but I want to just introduce, and we can start the show. Let's give a warm aloha to Chloe Walter Wallace and Sean Pierre Regis. Let's give them a round of applause.
Thank you so much, Anderson. This is a great room. Hello, welcome everybody.
Hello.
Hi. As Anderson said, I'm Chloe Walters Wallace. I'm the Director of Regional Initiatives at Firelight Media. I'm also the creator and executive producer of HOMEGROWN, the series, and we're really excited we presented last night, and these lovely filmmakers and some folks in the audience, season 2, Apart From. It's a short documentary film series, and we're really excited to have you here for our Beyond Resilience event today. This event is to dive a little bit deeper into the themes of A Part Of and Apart From, and the films are going to be premiering on PBS Digital Studios, PBS's flagship YouTube channel, starting on January 14th of next year. So please keep your eyes out. If you weren't able to come yesterday, watch. We'll join Firelight Media and all our stuff all our socials. I want to begin with a land acknowledgement. We are here today in Honolulu, on the land of the Namoku'aha people. At Firelight Media, we stand in solidarity with Indigenous people worldwide and like to remind our audience about Indigenous sovereignty and land rights. The subtitle for this season, A Part Of, Apart From, comes from the brilliant Dr. Michael Bevacqua. I was listening to a podcast as we were planning dreaming, thinking about this season, and one of his episodes really kind of blew my mind open, where he said this phrase, a part of, apart from. And so it's amazing that he's able to join us today. In it, he discusses how the U.S. territories, while technically overseen by the United States government, are not afforded the same rights as the U.S. states. The US territories, as well as the state of Hawaii, have their own vibrant cultures, languages, traditions, histories, and they live still in this liminal space, a part of and apart from the US.
So what are the challenges that come with that liminality? Which resources are not shared? And how much has US influence both helped and hindered life on these islands? And as it pertains to storytelling, why are films that depict, distress and disaster, in the cases of, for example, Puerto Rico or the Virgin Islands, why are those the ones that so often break through to US mainstream media outlets when more nuanced, everyday stories are happening on the ground in these territories that we are not seeing, that actually give a better view into what life is like on those islands, what culture is like on those islands? Before we begin the program, you want to thank the entire Firelight team, the filmmakers for creating such beautiful works for us to interpret this theme through. Thank you to our ongoing Beyond Resilience series supporters, including Open Society Foundations, the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, the National Endowment for the Arts, and Field Division. And a special thank you to our homegrown partners and supporters, of course, PBS, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, Pacific Islanders and Communications, Black Public Media, Latino Public Broadcasting, and the entire team at the Hawaii International Film Festival who have been such amazing partners. And we are so very thankful to premiere this entire series here. It means so much to us and the filmmakers.
We wouldn't have wanted to do it anywhere else.
Yes, truly. Not only because of, just look out the window, but now I'm going to pass it on to our moderator, Dr. Michael Bevacqua. Beyond being featured as an expert in Brian Muna's really wonderful, touching film that we premiered last night, Chamorro, A Lost Language, Dr. Bevacqua is a scholar and an activist and a curator at the Guam Museum. Prior to taking on his role at the museum, Dr. Bevacqua founded the first ever Chamorro Studies program at the University of Guam, and much of his work has focused on the impact of colonization on both Guam and its people, as well as the fight for sovereignty on island. So we are so excited to have him lead the discussion. You are the person to lead this discussion. So I want to pass it on to you. Thank you so much.
Before we start, please join us for our reception afterwards and get to know the filmmakers up here and in the audience.
Thank you. Oh, thank you so much to Firelight for bringing me out here, and it is again There was a poet who once said that the United States I contain many multitudes, and many people have used that to describe the United States, saying that it contains many multitudes. But even within that many multitudes, those who come from the territories and those who are its indigenous people in occupied lands are still often forgotten. And so that's why left out, ignored, marginalized, voiceless. And so that's why that idea of apart from is just an interesting way of talking about what it means to come from a territory of the United States, a country which is supposed to represent so much, ideals that are supposed to represent so much, but then what does it mean to be half in, half out of something that is supposed to represent so much, or to have your connection to that be controlled by somebody who can determine your existence with like a light switch, in, out, American, not American, FEMA, yes, FEMA, no, and so on. And so it is an honor to be here because the territories come from different oceans. It is very difficult to find out what is going on in each of the territories, and so it is rare that people from the territories get to come together and listen to each other's stories. And so Firelight has done amazing work in bringing together storytellers from the territories and occupied lands, indigenous people for whom there is very little resources to support the telling of their stories, precisely because they don't fit in to the many multitudes that make up the United States. And so I want to give them a round of applause right now, just for creating a space that is so rare. And so it is an immense privilege to be here and to have watched the films, but also just to have heard stories directly from the filmmakers themselves about what's going on in their islands, because I'm somebody who tries to follow as much as I can what's happening in other territories. But even with all that social media can provide us, and even all that AI can hallucinate for you, it's still difficult to know from my end of the Pacific what is happening in John's end of the Caribbean. And so so I encourage you, while you have people from different ends of the American empire here, speak to them, ask them about what is going on in their islands, because this is a very rare, very special opportunity. And so thank you all once again. And so, yes. And so let me introduce the filmmakers here with me. And so to my right here is Cris Romento. Cris Romento is the director of Dear Aloha, which is a very touching film that did not leave a dry eye, yesterday. And sort of it talks about how Hawaiians recreate home, recreate a sense of aloha, even after historical forces contemporary, have displaced them from their state, from their kingdom, from their lands. And so let's give a round of applause to Cris. And so next to Cris, we have Brian Munya. And Brian Munya, of course, do I even need to introduce you? Do I even need to introduce you? I know Brian well. I've known Brian for a while. I've worked with Brian a lot, and I can tell a few embarrassing stories about him because we live on the same island. And I'm just kidding. I won't tell any of those stories about him. But Brian directed the film Chamorro, A Lost Language. And that film, I can tell you, it also had many people crying in the theater yesterday, Chamorro and non-Chamorro. In the theater yesterday, I had a Chamorro sitting next to me on my left, a Chamorro on my right, and both of them were sobbing. Because it is a movie about feeling the need to pass on something to the next generation about your language, your culture, but then dealing with the loss of the fact that historical circumstances prevented your parents, your grandparents from giving you that language and culture. What do you do then with that loss? And so a very touching film. Let's give a hand to Brian. And so we have next to Brian's right, we have John P. Wheatley from the U.S. Virgin Islands. Now, there were some dry eyes in the room for your film, but there was a lot of WTF eyes. There was a lot of, I can't believe this. There were some tears, but it was tears of confusion, tears of outrage, because John's film, What the Storms Taught Us, really focused on after hurricanes had besieged the U.S. Virgin Islands and the Caribbean, sort of how the islanders struggle with incompetence, bureaucracy, and a number of different issues that have impacted the education, where students haven't had schools, where students have been without schools and lived in temporary schools, going from elementary and middle school all the way to high school and graduating in modular temporary schools. And so talking about what the storms have taught us about sort of living in a territory, living in an island, and living with this type of government, federal and territorial. And so let's give John a hand for his very hard-hitting film. And so now, as I said, a very rare opportunity, because when you watch all of these films, there's so many things that connect these films. Even though every island is different, there was still so many things that connected. And so I'm hoping that the filmmakers will bring some of that out. But that's the important thing in talking about the territories, is we need to build on what brings us together, but we also need to make clear that people understand that all territories are not made the same, And that was, I know that was, there's, those who made the American Samoan film are here. And so that was one of the most important lessons from their film, is sort of that one size does not fit all for the territories. Not all people in the territories want the same thing, and so this is an important reminder as we move ahead with this conversation. And so the first question that I have for the three of you, and whoever wants to answer it first, we don't have to go in the order that I introduced you. It's whoever wants the mic. But it's a basic question. It's kind of like it's a simple one, and I know you've all been thinking about it, but sort of what was, every filmmaker faces challenges, but what were the challenges that you faced coming from an island, coming from territories that you don't think that even previous filmmakers that worked with Firelight had to tackle, or other filmmakers, small or large, have to sort of contend with? Sort of, whether you are working from the territories in the diaspora or if you are in the islands, what were those sorts of challenges that you had to face? And what was that conversation like, sort of working on these films?
Well, for me, one of the biggest challenges working and creating a film project in the Caribbean, the Virgin Islands especially, an American territory, is the resources. It's hard to get the kind of resources that we need to have, like a proper, production, equipment, C-stands, just the basic tools that we could just walk into B&H in New York, or have a FedEx come and deliver overnight gear, or Pier Space, a Gigster for locations, and just those kind of things. There's accessibility to film creating tools. Just in the education, we don't really have a very educated workforce for creatives, because they're just trying to get the regular schools up and running, right? So to have an extracurricular space to teach filmmakers and teach students how to properly create something and tell stories, that's been my biggest struggle of creating outside of the United States for me.
No, thank you for that. And a quick question. Because one thing that we find in the Pacific is that there are plenty of companies that will not ship to Guam. Is that the same in the Caribbean? That there's companies, because you're a territory, they just won't ship to you?
Yeah, they're like, what?
Okay.
They like, certain company like Amazon just, I think, started shipping there, if I'm not mistaken, to my other VI people in the back. So it's like, when that happened, it was like, hey, we got Amazon. Everybody was like excited, because it's like, and we have to route the mail for the Virgin Islands comes through Puerto Rico. So they're like, Virgin Islands, yeah, you guys are cool, but to even get mail to the Virgin Islands, it goes through Puerto Rico, and then it's like good luck, honestly, and it's like another delay, and sometimes, your box might be empty, so it's just like, it's hard. And even that, with like storms and like when disasters happen, even like stateside, when you're getting relief aid to like Florida, Texas, North Carolina, like sometimes the utility trucks are already on the side of the road lined up waiting for the storm to pass, and they go right in, they get aid right away, they get supplies right away. For us, storms happen 2 weeks, 3 weeks, you're waiting on a boat. It's like, you're kind of like, we don't have neighboring states and neighboring resources. Our infrastructure is already not really well, so it's hard, No. So.
No, thank you.
Guam presented, like some of the other territories, a very unique challenge with production insurance because of the requirement for the amount to be covered on production insurance. That set us back. I want to say a little over a month in production, so everything else was pretty much catch up. And we try to work with insurance companies on island to try to see, how we could, help get the film rolling. But I don't know. I feel like there wasn't enough of an idea of what like, how would we cover this, and what were the rates going to be? And we were just like bouncing back and forth on rates. And so even I think we went and reached out to someone off island in the mainland, and the insurance company couldn't cover us because we weren't from U.S. soil. So that was really difficult. It threw me off for a loop and the team. The other side of it too was on Guam, there's a lot of mistrust in the media. And so with the film I'm trying to make, Chamorro Lost Language isn't a popular name when you're talking about the Chamorro language. And then also, just we have elders that are sometimes the gatekeepers that say, hey, we got, screwed from people in the past exploiting and productizing our culture. And what are you trying to do? And so those were the biggest hurdles, I think. Insurance, trying to reassure our people on island that I have the best intentions with the best team. When they heard a name like Firelight, they're like, who's that? Where's that from? And so, I think I was telling Jean-Pierre, I got 2-hour lectures, and still, everyone signed the waivers, but it was a lot of...
Just tell them, Firelight, that after the next storm, they make solar lights.
Yes.
The next typhoon hits, solar lights, Firelight. Oh, wow.
Yeah. And of course, all the islands, probably a lot of the islands experience this. We're trying to make sure we're finishing before typhoon season. Things could happen. Last year, Guam recovered from Typhoon Mawar. So, not having internet, things like that, those are things we're trying to compensate for. So those are some of the challenges.
No, thank you. Cris?
I think my story is a little different because a majority of the filming took place in the Pacific Northwest. And to tell a diasporic story, it's in 2 different places, and that was my biggest challenge because, when I was developing this story, I wasn't sure how much was going to be in Hawaii and how much was going to be in the Pacific Northwest. Started becoming clear as I started walking down the path. And in Pacific Northwest, I had to scrap a few shoots because of the freeze that was happening in January, if some of you are familiar who live in Pacific Northwest. So, and we're talking about a halau, trying to dance in the Pacific Northwest with a limited number of times that I could access them. So safety became a priority for me there. And the other challenge had to be, like Brian said, trust. Here I am moving from New York a year and a half ago to Hawaii, but also trying to connect back with the place I left behind, Pacific Northwest, and trying to create trust. I didn't really know anybody when I moved to Hawaii. Shout out to Hawaii Women in Filmmaking, whose film lab, Vetta's here in the audience, who helped me with arms wide open, and the women who supported me early on. Erin Lau coming on as a producer right away, Kiara being my mentor, who brought me in and ushered me in to tell this story and to bring trust to the film here in Hawaii, and then here in the Pacific Northwest, a community that I hadn't been involved with in the film community for a minute, like knowing a few contacts to find the right people to tell this story, because I thought, when are we having the opportunities to tell this story with BIPOC and female-led teams? And that was very important to me, to have a female-led team. My cinematographer, Shanika, is female. My editor is female. Erin Lau. So those were very important for me. And then the BIPOC community, and even Native community. I had Native American crew, I had people of color, and I did interviews with them to understand each other's otherness before production even started. And then we created a production Bible that was 30 pages, because I'm an editor and OCD, about the meaning, like how the cultural practices that we need to be mindful of, that it wasn't just a subject, that we are coming into people's homes, we respect our elders, we take off our shoes. Don't come into my family's home without taking your shoes off. You're going to disrespect them. So those elements of trust, and that was a lot of work. It was a lot of work. It's not easy in a predominantly white community in Portland to find the right people involved, and I just didn't want to also tokenize anybody and like be like, oh, you're BIPOC, you're gonna be on the team. It was like, let's have a conversation. And I was so fortunate to be able to have people who got involved that really related to the story and resonated from the start before I even like filmed anything. And yeah, that was very special.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
No. All right, thank you. Round one. No, I'm just kidding. Don't fight. Okay. Thank you for your answers on the difficulties that you've faced. Now, I'm gonna for the next question. I'm gonna give you a chance if you want to vent a little bit, though, because we're gonna talk. So one of the things that we find is that islands, territories, places that are far away from the center, far away from the sort of the mainstream, the quote-unquote mainland, oftentimes they get exoticized, horrifically misrepresented. Somebody can come in and use them and tell a completely inaccurate, inauthentic story about them. One person can define them in a story and it can go viral and so on. And so I wanted to ask each of you, are there any stories, because each of you has roots in a particular place in an island which has these histories of so speaking from Guam, for example, Guam is a punchline for different comedians. So Johnny Carson loved to just make jokes about Guam for many years. Conan O'Brien and David Letterman used to love to just use Guam as jokes. And so it's just like, you could say it's harmless, but you could say also that it's part of just being like like on the edge of the empire. It's just this goofy, distant place, And so what I want to ask is, do you want to share any stories, films, news pieces that you're familiar with that represent the Virgin Islands, Guam, Hawaii, that have frustrated you, and then also or why you feel it's important sort of that people have that have roots, that have real ties to these islands, to these territories, to these occupied lands, that they participate in the telling of these stories. And so, John, you do not have to go first, but you're holding the mic, and so you can go first if you want to.
Stories of the Virgin Islands that...
And if you want to, this can be like territorial therapy. If you want to unload and just tell us what are the stereotypes that people have about the Virgin Islands. I'm thinking how Stella got her groove back.
Stereotypes of the Virgin Islands is most people don't even know it's U.S. You don't need a passport. And this is U.S. Virgin Islands for a reason. We're U.S. Virgin Islands. We don't need a passport. And people say, oh, you speak such good English, or like, I'm like, what am I supposed to speak? It's just like, it's something, they don't even know where it is. I have to reference Puerto Rico most of the times when I'm talking about the Virgin Islands. I said, it's right next to Puerto Rico, for them to know. And it's like, oh yeah, I know where Puerto Rico is. Yeah, we're right next door, So it's just like people are just not informed enough about us. And that's kind of sad. They know about Tim Duncan, he's been one of the greatest basketball players ever. So that's kind of been like a shining light for us. But our people, we export our greatest resources, which is our people. So the Grammy of the Year this year was my best friend. Grammy Songwriter of the Year, Teron Thomas, from the Virgin Islands. This Walcott, Denise Walcott, she's like the strongest lady in the world this year from the Virgin Islands. There's so many great people from the Virgin Islands. It's like from a small place, we export some of our greatest people. And that's kind of like how we kind of like try to, combat, like, where is it, But, there's a lot of stories of the Virgin Islands that we don't hear about, like you said, that's happening in the territory. For us personally right now, it's our power grid issue. We have a bad, it was blackouts all the time. That's one of the things I faced in production. Like I would schedule something to go shoot somebody and go to their house, and they're like, hey, we have no power. You can't come to my house right now. You know, schools are out because there's no power, and they have no generators in the schools. You know, so it's like one of our biggest things in from where the Virgin Islands is a bad power grid situation, and you want that to be heard more. So yeah, I don't know if I answered the question, but
No, that's good. That's good.
That's me venting. That's me venting about.
No, that's why I said it's important, and I think that people who come from other territories, like in Guam, for example, we can relate to a lot of what you just shared, but anything though that you want to talk about in terms of why it would be important that somebody from the Virgin Islands talk about Virgin Island stories, though, so as opposed to somebody who maybe just comes in for a week and then writes a story about the Virgin Islands or makes a movie about the Virgin Islands.
Because only a Virgin Islander can tell the story of the Virgin Islands. There's only somebody from Guam can tell the story of Guam. Only somebody from Hawaii can tell the story about Hawaii. So it's like we can't let anybody else paint our story and tell our story. We have to be the ones to tell it, because even coming down here for the first time, I can't really. I scratch the surface. I'm not here embedded to really get and let it soak into me. So to really speak on that strongly, I can say, man, I had a great time in Hawaii for a week, But you have to have a lived experience, a true lived experience, to be able to talk about something and with any kind of authority. And coming in from outside, if you're coming in from outside, it's almost like it's a job. But, when you live it, it's more passionately spoken. And if you experience it and it affects you, and it's in your veins and your blood, if it gives you chills when you're speaking about it, it's different than you just coming for a 1 week assignment. So you have to have some skin in the game to be able to speak.
Very nice.
On anything.
Woo! No, thank you. And
Matilda, they were running away from the law and they said, we're going to Guam. Austin Powers, there was a satellite somewhere in Guam. I think there was a film with priests and they said the other priests ran to Guam. So we're like this place where people run to in movies.
yeah,
we're
the priest's exorcist, yes.
Yes, that one. Max Havoc, that was the first time I saw what I thought should have been locals portrayed by another, another actor. And this person in this film, in Max Havoc, was completely just dumbfounded by everything. And that was the first time I felt really offended.
So Max Havoc was, sorry.
Context.
No, yeah. I'm almost certain that maybe Tom remembers Max Havoc,
Yeah.
but I'm almost certain that no one else here knows. So Max Havoc was a movie that was directed by the late Albert Pune, director of Cyborg with Jean-Claude Van Damme. But it was part of kind of like this thing where this company came into Guam and they promised they would bring Hollywood to Guam. And they said that they had who did they have attached to the movie? Carmen Electra.
Yeah, Carmen Electra.
Carmen
at the time,
Electra.
yes.
Some people,
Yeah.
maybe not younger, but my
David
age or
Carradine,
older,
I
might
think,
remember
yeah.
who Carmen Electra is.
Yeah.
Some of you might remember who Fat Joe is, the rapper.
Yeah.
Okay. Some of you might remember who John Shaft is. Richard Roundtree. Or who was Kung Fu? David Carradine.
Yeah.
So these were all actors in the movie called Max Havoc and the Curse of the Dragon. And so they came to Guam and said, we're going to bring Hollywood to Guam. All you have to do is just give us this loan through your Economic Development Authority, give us all this sponsorship and stuff. And so they filmed most of it in Guam. They filmed parts of it in California. And then they released it and it went straight to the bottom of the trash can at Kmart.
Yes. Yeah.
And so, there was a big lawsuit to get the money back because it was like a really poor movie.
But what it did do for Guam was that they would go in to other companies coming from off island saying, hey, because they heard that Max Havoc was funded from Guam. And so I would go in as a filmmaker, a local filmmaker, trying to find funding for a film. But hey, you know, we don't want what happened with Max Havoc, so you guys, we can't support you. So the locals were punished, the local filmmakers were punished in terms of funding, in terms of support, in terms of streamlining a film commission, I felt. I was in some meetings with people in our legislature, and just trying to cookie cut adopt, you know, certain things that would affect us as filmmakers before we even got to a point where we were honing our skills. Again, we're on an island where it's very small, and the talent pool is very small. Like, I could name every filmmaker on island. And so there is that. And that was the biggest hurdle for me and my fellow filmmakers on island, was just, there was this Max Havoc stain, and it stained us as locals before we had a chance and a voice.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Sorry.
I think just to, what was the question again?
So if you want to vent, and Hawaii is
Yeah,
different
I'll
because
vent.
Hawaii has lots of movies, and so there's almost too many to think of in terms of things you could be angry about.
Yeah.
And there's also Elvis and Lilo and
Yes,
Stitch.
oh my gosh.
And oh my goodness. So,
That's what I was thinking of.
but if
Yes.
you want to also take on the issue of why then it's important, why
Yes.
Hawaiians should be the ones involved in the production of media and representation.
Okay, yeah. I was involved in everyone's responses, so had a refresher. Well, that started when I first started workshops the title of the film. I mean, I knew I wanted to do a concept of aloha, and when I came to Hawaii, my mentor, Meliana Meyer, and I sat at a table and were thinking of the names that we could do, but then also get across the concept of aloha to a wide audience. And there were a bunch of names thrown out, and Dear Aloha stuck that day, and we were like, let's meditate on it. In that conversation, we thought, okay, you know, it shows the distance, and I'm obsessed with letter writing. And so, like, the dear, like, just shows the thousands of miles away you can be, and, like, how you're writing this love letter to aloha. And also, dear aloha, you know, like, it's so dear to us. So then I went home, and then I was like, aloha, you know, I don't know if I should name my film that. And then I went on IMDb, and I looked up aloha. I was like, let me see what films are out there. And the top 5 films, I'm pretty sure there are more, but the top 5 films, I went a deep dive. And, you know, there are a lot of Hallmark films out there, rom-coms, and there is no Hawaiian cast, no Hawaiian crew, no Hawaiian writers. And I thought, okay, I think I got angry. And I thought, I need to reclaim this word if I can in any way I can. I'm not sure it'll ever show up on IMDb with these top films because they're obviously viewed a ton of time. Oh, I forgot the problematic Aloha film, which, you know, you can Google. But yes, so I thought, all right, let me just have a native hand in this deeply sacred word. And as we know, there's a lot of films out there that are made in Hawaii that have no welfare for our community. So that's where it started from, this place of like wanting to show aloha you know, it's throughout the world. When I've traveled, I've seen like bars in Barcelona named Aloha, or seen it on hats, and it's commodified. And I thought, I wanted to make something that was intimate and beautiful and showed how I grew up with it. Yeah.
Oh, thank you, thank you. All right, round 2, done. Now, I want to, we have less than 10 minutes left though, so I want to ask each of you sort of an individual question about your films now. And so, so John, for your film, of course, focuses on children and schools, and I wanted to give you a chance specifically to talk about any challenges that you faced filming around that, because of course, there's sensitivities around dealing with children, educational spaces. But then also I wanted to give you a chance if you wanted to just speak about sort of to let others know, what are the realities that sort of families are facing in educational terms? You've spoken a little bit about it, but if you just want to say a little more on that in the Virgin Islands.
My biggest challenge was that I had to interview the bad guy. So I gotta kind of do a little dance with them to kind of say, hey man, let me in your house. Show me this house, right? And when I'm going into your house, I'm looking for the problems that I'm gonna come back and try to body slam you with, right? Because it's this is a problem, and people are pretending that it's not a problem, or they're dragging their feet to the problem to get it fixed. But if I go in there with that posture, they're not gonna let me in the house, So I kind of gotta tap dance around. How do I get in here? And to be able to tell a story to help these children, I need you to crack the door for me to let me in to see what's going on. And so that was my biggest problem, because it's I can't get anything shot if they don't allow me inside, right? So that was hard for me. So, and then it's when I got into the school, they were like, hey, we're gonna go to this school and you're gonna speak to the teacher of the year. Right? Not I have free reign to speak to whoever teacher I want because and then with that, it's teachers are even scared to even speak out. Because if they speak out, they might lose their job, they might get some kind of, kickback that they're not, deserving of, right? And they're not gonna let me into the schools that, literally 3 weeks ago, a ceiling fan fell out of the roof and hit a kid. I want to go to that school, but they're not going to let me into that school. They're going to let me into the school that's closest to them, that's in the best condition, right, to show with the teacher of the year. I don't want to speak to her, respectfully. I want to speak to a teacher that's frustrated, who's at home, who the classroom's hot, who is mold in the ceiling, the children look sick. I want to speak to that frustrated parent, teacher, child. But no, you got to speak to this right here. So it was kind of difficult. And when I was talking to Firelight and the staff, and they were they were trying to talk to my mentor, try to figure out things of how to weave it in there and how to kind of get in. So that was hard for me. But I did it the best I can, and tried to crack the door a little bit to show something, to hopefully get some kind of the ball rolling in a better direction, hopefully.
No, thank you for sharing that. Now, Brian, to you, for your film, it's focused around passing on the Chamorro language to your children, though. And in the backdrop of your film is this idea, of course, these historical reasons why the language was not passed on to you and to so many in our generation, right? Because parents and grandparents didn't think it was valuable. They were punished for speaking Chamorro in schools, and so on. And that the United States, when it took over Guam, it brought these policies and these mentalities into the island. But so, attitudes have changed, though. And so I want to give you a chance really to just share, why do you think it's important to, after so many of our parents and grandparents didn't pass the language on to us, why do you think it's important that we get it back, that we reclaim it, and that we give it to our kids and grandchildren to the future?
So for me, in the doc, I talk about my past as a cultural dancer, and how even, I was talking to Dr. Bevacqua about how when I went to FESPAC in New Caledonia a long time ago, that was the first time I felt like I heard many languages. And I wasn't, even though I was a part of it, I was, sorry, I'm not trying to bring the, the theme in, but I was apart from it. And I was, and so just feeling that disconnect from leaving dance. And I talked about one of the reasons, I was telling someone, one of the reasons why I left dance is because I started to see how commercialized it was getting. I was performing at a hotel, and people were eating a buffet, and it made me feel like I was just this product of tourism. And so that was one of the biggest reasons why I wanted to walk away. And we see that now, right? We see culture in buffets, and we clap and we dance, and it's a good time. But for me, on the other side of it, there was a lot of shame. And even just trying to make this doc, Jean-Pierre, Winta, the Firelight team, they all knew I was having trouble even getting my grandmother to be in this film because there's shame. There's shame that the language wasn't passed to me. My mother didn't want to be in the film because there's shame. There's a lot of shame that no one talks about. And for me, I don't want to be that third generation that passes that shame to my children. But I cannot keep blaming them. I can't blame my mom and my grandparents because they were doing what they thought was right for us to survive. We were always taught and conditioned, go to school, join the military, go to college, learn English, only English, because tomorrow, that's a language for dumb people, right? And it wasn't from them. They didn't need to say that. They didn't say that to me, okay? But what happened was, I started to, as I get older, I'm thinking, what am I leaving my kids, really? I'm leaving them nothing if I don't share that language with them. The singing, even the dancing, and just hearing it. They don't see that, they don't hear that, they don't feel a part of, like, being a part of something special. And so for me, that's why it's important to spread the language to my children. And hopefully, because this is just my journey, I'm not trying to change the whole entire world, but I could start with my family, and then maybe, just maybe, other people are gonna follow. Because I was probably the biggest advocate of I'm comfortable in Western society, I'm comfortable with status quo. I got the job, I went to college, I didn't join the military because I was a rebel. I'm just kidding. But here I am now. And hopefully this film does what it's intended to, is to start the conversation.
C'est doucement c'est. And so to Cris, for your question, so films about Hawaii in this panel are a little bit different, of course, because Hawaii is not unincorporated territory compared to the other territories. But still, you could argue that Native Hawaiians exist in the same way, a part of the United States and apart from the United States, because of the history that they have as an indigenous people, as coming from a sovereign kingdom that was overthrown. And so I want to give you a chance, because we know that history is also part of the displacement that leads to the diaspora and so on. So I wanted to give you a chance to connect your film Hawaiian experiences more directly to the theme, because I think that some people might, the theme of homegrown and apart from, because I think some people might wonder, why is Hawaii on the list with the other territories? And so can you help us understand a little bit more about why it's appropriate?
Yeah, I was actually thinking about this question earlier. The part of, apart from, how it speaks to Hawaii and our experiences is, bigger picture for me is Hawaii is not prioritized by the United States. And there's a lot of tension in that experience. For instance, let's talk about going to the store to get your groceries, right? You go in the store, you see a $5, $6 avocado, and you say, hey, we have beautiful weather, why aren't we growing our avocado here, or a lot of other things? 90% of our food is imported in Hawaii. Why is that? We have the most ideal growing climate in Hawaii. So we turn that around and see that agrochemical companies have thousands of acres of our land. pesticides companies are using our land for their testing experiments, so we are the testing site capital of the world. So here they are thinking, oh, we have the ideal climate to test these, historically by schools, by hospitals, by communities, communities that are local, obviously, not people, foreign settlers. And that is directly affected by our $5 avocado that we see here, or our food insecurity. And so I personally don't see the issue with our pesticides testing. I personally see it connected with our housing crisis, our houselessness, our exploitation of land and natural resources that we have, and the heartbreak that we experience when we have to move. They're all connected. And when you hear that the land was subsidized by the government, these thousands of acres, you can look it up, and you see that our food prices are up the roof. And we only have, like, if we had no ships, we have a week of food to feed our Hawaiian Islands. So you see those issues, and you think there's $20 billion of spending a year in Hawaii on tourism. And it makes you think, and it makes you question, what are we doing for the Hawaiian people? What are we doing for the generational families here? And so, while Dear Aloha was a very personal film for me, and showed my father, and I cried the whole way through it. When I came home, I had to have my heart broken again. You know, I lived 30 years away. I come back. It's not the same anymore. What are those reasons? And I'm part of the struggle again of why we're not able to afford living here. So, in a nutshell, Hawaii, I don't think, is prioritized, and our people. And that makes us a part, yet part of.
Sidus Masi. No, thank you for sharing, and some important reminders about, especially since so many people in the United States think of our islands as paradises, or they don't think of us at all. And so these stories are important truths. And so I want to give a chance for one or two questions. And so I have a microphone, and I can walk. And I will get United frequent flyer miles by walking to you.
Aloha and mahalo for all of your mana'o and sharing with us and your wonderful films. Keala Lucero, I'm one of the local filmmakers here. I was curious to know if there was any lessons that you took away from the creation of your film, or if there was any feedback that you received that's going to help you to in your journey of making the next one.
I could speak a little to that. The biggest thing, thank you to the Firelight team for really working with us closely. And I say this because, yes, there were a lot of stressful moments. It wasn't easy, but I think what Guam needed too, and this is something that I would have to go back to the island, is now we know how to really produce a film the right way. Now we know all the legal things that need to happen to make a film happen. And it's very easy for us in our island to put ourselves in a bubble and not think about how can we expand filmmaking on our island to be screened in multiple places, because a lot of our films are made on Guam and they die on Guam. And how do we reach the most people is we make sure that film can travel the furthest reaches of the world, and that was what we got. That was the biggest experience we got. And thank you to my producer and wife, Marissa, as well, for bearing with me. We learned to be a married couple, and so that was the biggest part of it too.
The biggest takeaway for me as a filmmaker for my project, I think, is the true unedited voice of our people has to come from us. That's it. There is no other way around it, because if anybody speaks on our behalf, it's not going to be truth.
I really loved being part of the homegrown community with all these filmmakers here, because when would I ever get a chance to learn from about the U.S. Virgin Islands? That really opened up my eyes to the schools and Brian's film. Understanding that these island territories, and we're all connected in our ways of diaspora, of struggles with the U.S. Dear Aloha is going to the continent, and we're going to do screenings and an impact campaign so we can start having conversations around mental health, around Pacific Islander mental health, and also go to these screenings and get comfortable talking about our diaspora and having takeaway information and having an ecosystem where we have profiles of people who have come back home and who have returned. So we're hard at work doing that impact campaign right now. And yeah, I think I learned a lot from hearing how everyone is so related and how we can all share in these informations together and be better because of it, and also just feel really seen. Yeah.
This is totally selfish because I work for Firelight, but I do have a question. I mean, I think being here, right, and talking about community, one thing that I thought was always really special about this homegrown crew is that you guys were 8 filmmakers that could talk to each other. Here we're at a film festival where the most important thing I think that you can get out of film festivals is to sort of network with other folks who are in your position. This idea of like transparency being passed back and forth in an industry that can be very much smoke and mirrors. So a question for you is maybe what is one thing that you learned, just one thing, or one thing you were inspired by from the other filmmakers that were a part of this series, whether it was through seeing one of their work in progress screenings and being inspired artistically by something they were doing, or their way of talking about their issue. What was one thing that you learned from another filmmaker in your own process, with the idea that hopefully y'all can all speak to each other and sort of network outside of this to share information to become better filmmakers?
For me, one thing I learned from watching my fellow filmmakers was pacing. I feel for me, like sometimes slower is better. Mine kind of was like, I had a lot of information, so I was like, bam, 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 bam. You know, but watching the other films, I was like, just the breath allowed me to take it in, and it like, wow, you know? And it's just like the style of shooting, even like the over-the-shoulder shots. When I saw Brian, and it was like slightly go over to the side, and it got a little dirty shot, and the reverse, and it's like the lighting is like, I was geeking out. I was like, okay, cool, you know? But just the pacing sometimes, it's like taking a breath allows you to take in some of the information better. And for mine, I felt like I had so much, I started to go rapid fire, and that was one of the notes from Firelight too, slow it down. So, you know, watching the other filmmakers, you know, Patty's film, and, you know, all everybody's film, you know, Emmanuel's, and, you know, I just really appreciated the cinematography of it, the creating of it, the writing, the pacing, just everything overall. This was like so, it's just cool to watch, you know? And I'm just happy to be a part of that, such a great cast and a great team.
For me, I think one of the greatest things that happened was we were in a Zoom workshop training session, and they allowed us all to just, hey, we're gonna get off. You guys all communicate with each other and get to know each other. And I think from that, I mean, if you see us all, we keep hugging each other. I think this is the most hugs I had in my life. but we got that close because we realized too, like all our stories have a connection. We're all connected as U.S. territories. We all have very similar issues, and we still have very different voices and different perspectives, and it allowed us to really like look at each other and say, hey, you know what, like, how can I help you? I think we all want to, at some point, get together and not just make this like a one-off thing. You know, we want to continue the relationships. We want to continue to tell more groundbreaking stories that affect our U.S. territories. And I think just walking away with a genuine care, just seeing everyone's final film together and just seeing like, wow, we are just so much more connected. We saw the rough drafts, and then we saw the finals, and just the amazing support from each other. Like, how many times would you work, I don't know the industry that well, but how much time would you ever have the chance to work with a cohort of filmmakers and give each other that support? We had a WhatsApp group and we're just like, hey, are you alone in this? Am I alone? And then they're like, no, you're not alone. And so, yes, no, I'm just, but it was for the best. And so, you know, no one said that, but we became this family, this group of filmmakers that I hope people just see beyond even just us being U.S. territory filmmakers.
Making a film is hard, no matter what the subject. And that's something I learned with Firelight, like the legal, nodding our heads. That was when the WhatsApp group was on fire, the legal, everything, the credits roll, just producing, insurance. I have utmost awe for it. And I think what we all share, and what I feel is a very native idea is when you leave the door open from the person behind you. I was also very lucky to have Kiara as a mentor, who is amazing and part of Firelight, bringing in mentorship because you need that, and to like just, you know, really think, am I doing okay? Tiare and I would get together all the time, and a lot of the times was my savior, like, hey, let's go to the beach right now. We've been working all day. And that support was important in any way that, like, we can support each other. Like, we're in the trenches for a year, and like, I'm talking different time zones. Like, we're talking East Coast time zones, Hawaii time zones, Guam time zone at the start of the world, or, you know, with your time zone. Like, it was incredible. And this film might be small in 15 minutes. Our films might be short, but it's like monumental in my life. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. Sidus Masi, as we say in Chamorro, thank you. Thank you to all of you for sharing your reflections, sharing your thoughts. Thank you to all of you for coming for this panel, this conversation today. Yeah, thank you for hearing stories from the territories. And if you want to know more about Firelight Media, about the Beyond Resiliency program, remember you can go to firelightmedia.tv. Thank you all. Aloha. Oh, wait. Oh, I'm going to... Okay, hold on.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Let's give them one more round of applause.